All right, Redeemer. This week I'm going to teach through the hymn "Great Is Thy Faithfulness." Great is Thy faithfulness. We just started singing it recently at Redeemer. We used to sing it a lot at my old church, and I really like it. It was written in 1923, so almost 100 years old, by a man named Thomas Obadiah Chisholm, and was inspired by Lamentations 3:22 to 23. So let's just read that. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. So there's obviously the title of the hymn, and then some of this language shows up, and we'll see that as we move through it. So the whole idea is it's praising the idea of God's faithfulness, and it's our hope. So I've said before, kind of saved by the unchangeable nature of God, or safe in that. We're safe in his narrow-mindedness is kind of a controversial way to put it, in that God is fixed on who he is. He doesn't waver like we do. He's not going to promise to love us and then change his mind the next day. He's not going to leave us standing at the altar or that kind of thing. He knows who he is. He knows what he wants, and that doesn't change. And that faithfulness is really the source of invincible joy, right? It's his commitment to himself, and coming out of that, his commitment to his people and the things that he's promised them. And that faithfulness is a source of great joy, trust. And I would even just say, great is faithfulness. Like, why is his faithfulness great? Well, because faithfulness is great, right? For someone to be unmoving in their values and their holiness and their commitments is an admirable quality. And we actually don't really find that in humans. We find it in degrees. But there's the epitome of faithfulness, which is God, the unchanging God. And so being aware of that, the psalmist obviously wrote that, and then Thomas Chisholm put that into a hymn. Now, this is a different version than the original. So this is, this is verse 1. This is a chorus. And this is verse 3 in the original hymn. But this version has been altered by John Piper. I was actually just reading about that this morning. There's should he or should he not have altered this hymn? Should we alter hymns, especially when they might change the theology and whatever? You can read about that if you want. But this is the version we sing. John Piper added 2 verses here. So now in this version, this is verse 2, this is 3, and this is 4, right? So if you're singing through it, you might go verse 1, chorus. You might alternate, or you might go verse 1, verse 2, chorus, or something like that, right? But the chorus is something you keep coming back to. So we'll slow down a little more here. Some of this is pretty straightforward. So one of the things that's common in hymns, right, is some of the old language can be preserved, like saying, things like thy and thou and hast, things like that. But also syntax, right? So syntax means like kind of the order of the nouns and verbs and adjectives in a sentence, right? So Yoda has strange syntax, right? He says, he'll say things like, instead of saying I love you, he'll say love you I do, right? And we do that in poetry. We mess with the syntax, right? So here we see that already. Rather than just say your faithfulness is great, which is true, it's the same thing. It's more poetic, and to say great is thy faithfulness. So he's doing 2 things here. He's changing the your to thy, and he's messing with the syntax, right? Instead of saying your faithfulness and then going this way, he starts here. Great is thy faithfulness, right? Who? God, my Father, right? So acknowledging God as his Father, confessing that his faithfulness is great. It's just a praise is what it is. And now he's just going to describe, right, what he means by faithfulness, right? So this sentence here is an expansion of this word faithfulness. What do you mean? There is no shadow of turning with thee, right? Turning means change, right? What we were talking about, that there's God's affections, his commitments, his holiness, his purposes are not going to change. Not even a shadow. There's not an inkling, you might put it that way. There's nothing in you that is going to change. You are utterly faithful. You don't change. Thou changest not, right? Now, for a human, that could be an insult, right? You never change. Well, it's because we have flaws, and we want to see people grow and experience transformation. God doesn't experience transformation. And that is a great thing, right? Thou changest not, thy compassions, they fail not. So here, this God's compassion, number one, toward his children, towards his people that he's poured out grace on, it's a mercy, right? He looks on us, he knows our frame, he knows we are dust, he knows our pitiful condition, and he condescends to us out of compassion and loves us. And that never fails. That's not going to change. He's not going to change his mind and become judgmental toward us or lack empathy. That never changes, and it's a great source of strength and joy. As thou hast been, thou forever will be, right? As you have been in the past, right? So God, you're not going to change. The way that you've always been, as you have been in the past, you will be that way forever. Thou forever will be. So again, he's just taking that idea of faithfulness, meditating upon it, and expanding on it with different ideas and different phrases. So that's verse 1. Then you can jump into the chorus. We'll just cover this once. Great is thy faithfulness, right? He just starts to repeat this. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. And that's where we see that verse in Lamentations 3, right? His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning, right? Morning by morning, new mercies I see. Every day, right? The every day that we live, every day that we wake up, we see the mercies of God poured out on us. He sends the rain, he sends the food, he sends the discipline, he sends the training, he sends the church, everything that God gives to us morning by morning, we see every day. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided, right? You, God, your hand has provided everything I need. Peter says that, right? We have been given everything we need as it pertains to godliness. Everything, not one thing missing. And then he just repeats again, great is thy faithfulness, Lord, unto me. Now here's where we get into the parts that John Piper added. And this part of the controversy was because he really put a Calvinist spin on this. This verse or this hymn originally is really not strongly Calvinist or Arminian. Depends on how you take some of these phrases. But this right here is very clearly Calvinist. What Piper is getting at here as we move through this is the idea that, two things. Number one, that we in and ourselves had zero ability to win God's faithfulness, right? We are completely 100% dependent on God's compassion. And then the other thing he's going to talk about is this idea of Christian hedonism and the idea that or as he says, God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him, right? This idea of joy. So let's just start going through this. I could not love thee, so blind and unfeeling. So I was not able to love you, God. So he's looking back on before his salvation. He says, I was unable to love thee. And the so blind and unfeeling refers to the I, not the thee. I was so blind. So my eyes were unable to see your glory. Right? The God of this world has blinded the mind of unbelievers. And I was unfeeling. I was insensitive to the things of God, the glories of God. Right? I found the word of the cross foolishness, folly, and at best was unfeeling, and at worst maybe even, right? God, the Bible calls the unbelieving heart the haters of God. But he at least is zeroing in on this unfeeling. He was unable to love God. Covenant promises. So these are the promises that God makes to his people, right? To show them compassion, to pour out his mercies morning by morning, to build a covenant with them, which means basically a contract and an arrangement, an agreement to be bound together. Those promises, the gospel promises of salvation and transformation and freedom and joy and the Spirit and all that, fell not to me. These were not for me. Because I did not love thee, I did not know you. I was outside of the fold of God. These promises fell not to me. Then something happened, right? And Piper's really getting on to the idea of God's soul being the sole actor in salvation. Here, what happened? Did he change? Did he suddenly become able to see and feel on his own, or did something happen? Well, let's see what happened. Without warning, desire, or deserving, I found my treasure, my pleasure in thee. So something happened. He went from not loving God because of his blindness to now finding his pleasure in him, his treasure and his pleasure. What happened here? I was without warning, desiring, deserving. I was transformed. I didn't do this, right? There's no warning, right? When you become a Christian, you don't know the day before that that's going to happen. It just comes out of nowhere, according to God's sovereign grace and his sovereign timing is when he's going to reveal and make the light of Christ to shine in your hearts, right? Remove the blinders. He didn't get a warning. He didn't even want it, he says. It's not even something I wanted, right? I was just wandering from the fold of God, blind and unfeeling, and suddenly something happened. I had this change invade my life, and I certainly wasn't deserving because I'm a sinner, I'm far from God, I've committed idolatry. If anything, I deserve judgment, but God's compassions, they fail not. So that's his, right? That's his conversion, basically, testimony. Verse 3, I have no merit to woo or delight thee, right? So merit would mean something that we've earned, something that, that we can bring before God and say, hey, because of this, you therefore respond to me in this way, right? We can't woo God, right? It means to woo means to like invite his affections, right? Or his attention, or to delight him, right? To give him joy. There's nothing that we have that we can bring to the table that's going to win God to us or give him joy. No works, right? This is basically another way to put it. I don't have the works, the good affections, the good thoughts to woo or delight thee. I have no wisdom or powers to employ. It's the exact same thing, right? There's nothing I bring to the table. No merit, no wisdom, no power. But then what is his hope? Yet in thy mercy, right? This idea of God's compassion poured out to him. The yet, right? In spite of the fact that I don't have these things, I have no merit, wisdom, or power, there's hope because of God, right? That's the hope. It's not in me, it's in him. Not in I, but in thy. In your mercy, God, how pleasing you find me. How pleasing thou findst me. You find me very pleasing. That's what that's saying, right? You find me very pleasing. Why? What is God's pleasure? This is thy pleasure, God. This is your pleasure. Here's what gives you delight when you look at me. That you are my joy. In other words, the thing that gives God delight in us is that he sees that we see now, because he healed us, his glory, right? Because his glory, his person, who he is, and all that comes with that, his character, his holiness, his glories, his power, his compassions, his mercy. When our eyes are open to that, and we cry out, great is thy faithfulness, while you are our only hope, you are greatest, he finds that delightful because it's true, right? Our sinful state is to believe that God is not glorious and to look to other things as our hope. When we're healed of that and we see and agree with God that he is the most glorious thing in the universe, that gives him pleasure. This is thy pleasure, that thou art my joy. And here we look quickly at the last verse of the original hymn. Pardon for sin and a peace that endureth. This is what we have, right? Because of Jesus' work on the cross, and God's driven by God's compassion and mercy. We have pardon for sin. Jesus took the punishment for our sin, and we receive the gift of righteousness, forgiveness. So that's one thing, right? That he receives, and a peace that endureth, right? So he's talking about this, I would say probably twofold. Peace with God, right? We've been reconciled with God. We're no longer enemies, and it's not going away. Why? Because God is faithful. He's not going to change. It wasn't us that had merit to woo him. Therefore, it's not on the basis of our merit that we will keep that reconciliation. It's based on the covenant promises of God. So we have now this peace that endureth, which also creates an inner peace. So we have peace with God vertically, and that creates an inner peace in the heart because, well, you're reconciled with your Father. What else do I have? So he's listing things he has here, right? I have pardon for sin, a peace that endureth. I also have thine own dear presence, right? So that's God being with us, God, the Holy Spirit, taking residence up in us, living in us, and it's dear to him, right? It's a treasure. It's a pleasure. It's a gift. I have that. And what does that presence, the Holy Spirit, do with me? It cheers and guides me. Thine own dear presence to cheer and to guide. So it gives me joy as I'm faced with, the troubles of the world or the troubles of my own sin, as I'm focused on them. God's Spirit cheers me, reminds me of the faithfulness of God through everything, that the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, right? And in turns, lifts kind of, right, tucks or lifts the chin of our heart, so to speak, and cheers us as we move through life. And to guide, right, to guide our conscience, our discernment, our decisions. And that's very dear. So what else does he have? Strength for today, right? So similar to what I was talking about, being cheered, right, in the face of adversity and everything that we face in this world, tribulations as it may be, we have strength for today. God will give us that mercies, right? Morning by morning, he will give us the strength for what we need, and bright hope for tomorrow. Why? Because this invincible world that we live in is not all there is. We know that one day we will be like him, that the mortal will put on immortality and that kind of thing, and that creates a bright hope. Blessings all mine. What are the blessings? These things that he's listed: the pardon for sin, the peace, the presence, the strength, the bright hope. These are all the blessings. They're all his, with 10,000 beside, which means this is just a short list, right? This is a lot right here. I mean, if you had pardon for sin, peace, cheer, guidance, strength, and bright hope, man, that's a good life. When he's saying besides that, there's even 10,000 more, and we know there's more than that, right? This is poetic language. In the arms of my dear Savior are 10,000 charms, where the reality is there's a lot more. So we're actually going to be singing this song this Sunday, so hopefully you get a chance to see this before that and just pack it with a little more meaning. So thanks for tuning in. Feel free to suggest a hymn if you'd like me to do one. See you guys.